You can't have a bad day if you start off by making your body think you might freeze to death. But at the same time, the other probably more clinical effects that I wouldn't be able to speak to accurately, but it definitely changed my mental health in so many ways too.
It's a profound physiological experience. It affects every system in the body. And all of our systems are connected, right? Our metabolic system, our central nervous system, endocrine system, musculoskeletal, et cetera. They're all interconnected. So things that hurt one hurt everything. And things that help one help everything. So we can have the vicious cycle, but the good news is we can create a virtuous cycle for ourselves.
Welcome to the On the Path podcast, a conversation on navigating life. Join Chris Coker and Colin Creech as they have honest conversations with fellow travelers on the path. In each episode, they explore the physical, mental, and spiritual health aspects of the whole self, striving for personal accountability and a strong community. Gain insights, learn from our mistakes, and hear from guests who have mastered these areas. Step on the path, embracing every challenge and success along the way. See you on the path.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are actually live together today. We're out of Chris Coker's house, which is in the very, very farthest north part of the United States.
Buffalo, New York, baby.
But it's great to film with them live, but we have a very special guest today and a very technical episode. So why don't you give us a bit of a flavor of who we had on this episode?
Absolutely. So this week, we're sitting down with Dr. Chris Frueh, who is a clinical psychologist by trade with over 30 years of experience in adult psychopathology. He is currently a professor at the University of Hawaii Hilo. Over the course of his career, he's been very focused on trauma and PTSD and mental health challenges that led him into this space focused on military special operations and this first responder focus. He actually had a book come out earlier this year. So why don't you tell us more about that?
Yeah, the book is called Operator Syndrome. And I have to say, it is such a look behind the curtains of it. It's not just about sometimes going to therapy, which is extremely important, but how you can also take care of your body or to look at healing from multiple different ways. And I think what really stuck out is this isn't a book just about elite military operators. He's really expanded his scope looking at first responders, police, firefighters, but also other branches of the military and some of our more bigger units like the infantry or artillery. And just I learned so much. This debrief is going to be extremely long, but in addition to this book, in addition to authoring or co-authoring over 300 scientific publications, I think there's a special place in your heart for
Yes,
Chris Frueh as well.
Yes. So not just, as Colin said, all of this clinical side of his writing career, but he's also written several historical crime novels where he follows the protagonist, who is actually a bank robber in Great Depression America, who's seeking redemption while also fleeing from J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. So I just really appreciate that about Chris, that he has this deep, deep clinical expertise, but he also has this creative streak that he wants to explore as well. So truly a fantastic episode. And I say, without further ado, let's just get right into it.
See you on the path.
See you on the path.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Very excited to be here with today's guest, Dr. Chris Frueh. Chris, we're stoked to have you here today. I think this is going to be a fantastic conversation. One thing you may not know that all of our listeners do know is we like to kick off with an icebreaker before we start getting into the juicy stuff. And so we had a question for you. I wanted to know, you're given two foods. You get one healthy and one unhealthy. The rule is they're the only two foods that you can eat for the rest of your life. What two foods are they?
Well, I'm going to go with steak, beef steak, and mushroom pizza. Is that unhealthy enough to count?
Yeah, I was wondering where he was going with it. I think mushroom pizza, is that a go-to normally?
Yeah.
Any particular... Is it Pizza Hut, Papa John's? Is it something gourmet? Do you have a place?
Oh, I tend to make my own.
Are you a Traeger guy? Sorry, it's a grill.
No, I don't have one of those. I've admired them from afar.
Right.
I guess the question is pizza considered unhealthy enough for this purposes of this question? Because pizza could have, mushrooms is good for you. Tomato sauce, good for you. Cheese, up to a point, good for you. And then the crust.
I guess it depends on the
whole
crust.
Wheat. The crust could be whole wheat.
That's true. My challenge would be, I will say your answers are eerily close to what mine would be, Chris. The beef, the steak, protein for sure, all day long. And pizza, mushroom and sausage is my go-to. And I do not know how to control myself with a mushroom and sausage pizza. So the issue would be moderation would be a problem.
There you go. Yeah. So I would be willing to add sausage or pepperoni just to kind of get it over on the more unhealthy side of things so that I meet the criteria.
All right.
This would be an awesome study to see, like, I hope nobody does, but what would that look like at the end of somebody's, let's say, how does that work out at the end is where my head goes to with that.
Like after a month?
No, I mean, like if somebody did that for the rest of their life, what data would you learn?
But I was thinking like a month, you could study, like you could take all the blood lipids and metabolic measurements pre and then after a month. And like that guy that ate McDonald's, nothing but McDonald's.
Oh, yeah.
That was fascinating.
Supersize me.
I have to say, I should have known that was coming because as we gave the guest an introduction on you before we started, you do have clinical trial experience too. So I should have known that was a bad door to open when we were.
We could do that research. We could do that research.
All right.
We'll connect after this. You will be out of your depth.
I would be down for a month. I would be okay with it. But I go ahead.
You wouldn't have any trouble recruiting subjects for a study like that. That would be kind of the.
That's true.
Free food and provided, I'd be available. But Chris, we're really thankful to have you on the show today. And before we dive in, we really want to know more about your book, Operator Syndrome, but also a lot more about your background that has to do with a lot of the areas that we're familiar with as veterans, but at the same time, the other areas that, it kind of unlocks when you talked about first responders and other individuals. But one thing that really helps us understand our guests on this show is just trying to understand maybe one experience that shaped you and really defined something in your life and brought you here. It can be anywhere in your life, but It's always interesting to know what was something that really stuck out to you in your life that shaped who you are today.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you two kind of connected things. I started graduate school in 1987 to work on a PhD in clinical psychology, which I eventually completed in 1992. And my goal was my career goal was to work with veterans, treatment with veterans. And so before that, in the 1970s, as a teenager, as an early teenager, I was very close to my great-grandfather who had fought at the Battle of San Juan Hill in 1898 in Cuba during the Spanish-American War. So he was a combat veteran. My father also was a veteran. He'd served in Vietnam as a physician, not as a combatant. But so I grew up with this awareness of war and partially what it meant to the men who served in war zones. Part of my great-grandfather's story was about his homecoming and how he was received and welcomed when he came home, which is a whole long story in of itself, but just to cut to the chase, he and many other soldiers coming back from Cuba were very sick. They were housed at Camp Willock, which was a very hastily built camp at the top of Long Island, New York. And they were all very sick with mosquito-borne diseases. There wasn't much there for them. It was a great big muddy field with tents. And a wealthy woman from New York City came up with her butler and brought several soldiers home with her to her home in the city, and she nursed them.
Wow.
And my great-grandfather was one of them, and he always maintained that he might not have lived if not for her. So he gave her a lot of credit. Mrs. Jack Bean was her name. And as she nursed these soldiers back to health, as they got ready to go home, she would give them money to get home. So
wow,
this to me was an inspirational example of a civilian in society taking it upon herself to provide aid and help to men who had served.
That is a phenomenal story. I would love to know more about that. What did you say her name was one more time?
Mrs. Jack Bean.
Jack Bean. Wow.
I dedicate my book, the Operator Syndrome book, to her and to my great-grandfather, whose name is Claude Brocklebank.
That's outstanding. And that's what a great answer to that question. I could see there's legacy. And I love what you pointed out, that you don't have to have served to be within the community that supports, right? And the work that you do, the work that those before you have done is a critical ingredient to winning in that space, to giving, combat veterans the support and the help that they need. One of the things I'd be curious to understand, Chris, is the focus on the psychological needs of special operations along your path as you got it deeper and deeper into your practice. Like, why the focus on special operations? Is it just the volume of exposure, or what was what led you to that focus area?
Serendipity, a little bit, random chance, a little bit. So just to give a quick overview of my career arc. So in 1991, my final year of training, I was at the VA in South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina. And then as soon as I got my degree, I just kind of went from being a trainee to an employee at that VA. And so I worked at the VA, at a VA hospital in a PTSD clinic for about 15 years, clinician and then eventually researcher. It was academic. So I was both at the VA and the Medical University of South Carolina. And I had a whole research and clinical career, traditional VA. I left in 2006. And of course, there's a story behind that, which we probably don't have time to get into. But I came to the University of Hawaii, where I am today. And I really kind of thought my work with veterans was probably behind me. I left the VA with a bad taste in my mouth. I was very not unhappy with patients, but I was very unhappy with the system. And so I just kind of felt like I was done working with the VA. And I've not worked with the VA since 2006. But I had a part-time job that came my way, and I was working in Houston. So I was commuting between Hawaii and Houston every month.
Oh, wow.
And in Houston, and I did that for about a decade, working at Baylor College of Medicine and the University of Texas. My friends in Houston turned into became the veteran community. And found myself with a lot of friends from the SEAL and Army Special Operations community, and some from the intelligence community. And as they became aware of my background, some of them started to talk with me, and then their friends. And so for me, it wasn't like I decided, now I'm going to go work with special operations. It kind of just happened. But part of that story also is my background, my expertise as a so-called PTSD expert really wasn't that relevant. And so for about the last decade, since I've been working with the community, and I would extend that now to many other levels of or branches, not branches, MOSs of the military, infantry, artillery, other combat arms, but also first responders. So in the last few years, doing a lot of work with firefighters and law enforcement. Yeah. The things that we have been seeing in the special operations community, maybe it's a little bigger, maybe the impairments are more broader, but seeing very similar patterns in other groups. And so it's really kind of changed and informed. Lessons learned from the soft community have changed and informed my own approach to everything in psychology.
And, one of the things I just want to unpack, and I think I saw you're about to say something, Colin, so I'll be quick. But for all of the listeners out there, one of the things we talk about, on the path, right? Staying on the path. And one of the conversations we have is we don't know what's in front of us, right? We don't know the next step in the path we have to take. And one of the things that I feel like I'm picking up from you, Chris, is being willing to opportunities and experiences as they come up. You're trusting in the experience that you have behind you and kind of the skill set that you've built along the way. But then throughout your careers, these new opportunities have come up, whether it's, you're out in Houston, you're starting to meet the operations community, or then all of a sudden you're realizing that first responders like firefighters, law enforcement, they might have there's just an interesting way that you're pulling in opportunities on your path along the way. And so I kind of wanted to just really highlight that point for all of our viewers and our listeners out there, that's kind of sort of what right looks like in the story that you just told, Chris, that you don't know what's in front of you, but if you're able to trust the experiences and the expertise that you have up to this point, you will be more willing to take those on along the way. And then I think that has a positive impact on the level of influence that you're able to provide in your community. So I don't want to speak for you, Chris. I hopefully that is kind of close to maybe what you would think, but it's just, that's kind of where my head goes as you're talking through your kind of your career path over the years.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I would just add one thing. I would say when I look back over the last 32 years of my professional career, what I can see is that about every 7 to 10 years, I take some kind of significant left or right turn that's not been planned. It's not, okay, now I'm going to go do X, Y, and Z. It's usually something that starts as a one-off and then turns into something more than what I was expecting.
Yeah.
I was going to add to that because what we talk about on this podcast is trying to learn from guests about areas of the whole self philosophy, which is physical, mental, spiritual, personal accountability, and a strong community, but learn from guests so that we can also find ways to do those things better. And the path being you're living with intentionally, living with purpose. And what I noticed with you, especially from that experience that shaped you, was it was a very clear direction, but at the same time, these opportunities you mentioned every 6 or 7 years, it leading to something else and something else. It's so it's inspiring to me to see where that has brought you by starting off with that clear purpose. And
that's the key word, purpose.
Yeah,
that's the key word for all of us is purpose.
Yeah. And we are very intentional. We can't tell somebody what their purpose is, so we're just trying to find those tools for whatever that purpose may be for somebody that can help us stay on the path with towards that purpose or on that purpose in a better way, whatever that is for us. But one thing I'd love to dive a little deeper into, can you tell us how you define operator syndrome and maybe some of those aspects you've learned, throughout your experience as you've, that coined that term?
So the term operator syndrome does come from my work and the collaborative work with others with the special operations community. And so I'll just say this. I have worked with operators, both retired and active, across the Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force, Canadian SOF. I've worked with individuals at multiple different types of units. So the Army has a variety of different units that would be qualified. I've worked with many guys from a variety of different units, as well as intelligence in the paramilitary community, as well as the private defense contractor community. So I've done a lot of work with private defense contractors who are similar, and many of them come from SOF community first, but not all. Not all of them do. Many of them come from SWAT or from Marine Force Recon units, Ranger battalions, all kinds of backgrounds. Let me give a principle here, which is, I think traditional mental health care, we put what's in your head, all of what's in your head is kind of in the foreground. So that's the psychological piece. And then we know there are physiological effects. If you're depressed, there's physiological effects, but we keep those in the background. My perspective on mental health and wellness in general is that we need to reverse them. We need to push physiology forward. And the psychological part, not saying it's not relevant, but that can be behind the physiology. So if we're taking care of everything from a physiological perspective, we're going to be much better off. So sleep, diet, exercise, how we use our spare time that affects our cortisol and our metabolic functioning, all of those things. And that has implications for lifestyle. It also has implications for treatment. So when we say somebody has depression and we need to treat them clinically, I'm not putting down psychiatric medications or psychotherapy. Those are important, but they're not the only tools we have, and they're not the only tools we should be aware of.
That's outstanding. And for those of you that are only listening, you could see Colin and I nodding our heads, grinning ear to ear. Chris, what you're saying is it really, really is, music to our ears. And first of all, thank you for the position that you take here, because we were talking about this a little bit before the show too. And this is something that is just so critically, it is one of the core kind of undertones that Colin and I have when we talk about the whole self philosophy, this idea that we do individually have a personal responsibility, or we should, to maintain strength, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And that means different things to everybody. And that's okay. But I think what you're saying really is that we do have to focus on that. There's things that we can do to self-lead and to self-serve a little bit before just defaulting on a potential, some sort of other form of intervention. And again, like you said, I'm with you. There are moments when that is what's needed, but I love this idea of, well, let's start with a conversation and really start to understand holistically what are an individual's needs, or what are my needs, and then how can I achieve those needs?
Right on. And so I haven't actually even answered the question about what is operator syndrome, which I'll do in just a moment. But I want to just to build on what you just said, just as a very simple example. One of the things that we've learned in medicine over the last decade very clearly is that chronic systemic inflammation, that is inflammation that is in our body in every cell flowing through our bloodstream, this inflammation is something that has become much more of a health factor for us than it was 100 years ago. Because it's driven by our modern lifestyle, the way we eat, the way we exercise or don't exercise, the way we sleep or don't sleep. And so this inflammation we now realize is a driver of pretty much all chronic illness. So that includes diabetes, cancers, autoimmune disorders, obesity, everything.
Yeah.
As well as depression. We now have really good causal evidence that inflammation is a causative factor in depression. So if you treat the inflammation, something as simple as hot sauna bathing 3 times a week, the depression is going to be reduced for most people. And I'm not saying that that's a flat out cure. We don't have anything that's a flat out cure, but it's a major way of helping yourself feel better. So operator syndrome is not a diagnosis. It's a framework. Think of it as a framework. So a lot of times we get lessons from certain groups that have unique experiences, and then we figure out how to generalize them to everybody or to other similar groups. So working with special operations, what I see, and I'll just go through a list fairly quickly, and then we can talk about how this might apply to other folks. But in special operations, in folks who have been in the military for 6, 8, 12, 20 years or more, we see high rates of traumatic brain injury. So the brain is being injured in the course of the work. It's inevitable. It's part of the job. You can't do the training without sustaining effects and injuries to your brain. So I kind of put everything on brain health. Then we have sleep disturbance, high rates of sleep apnea. We have endocrine disturbance. So problems with hormonal functioning. The guys I see and work with, most of them have low testosterone. The testosterone essentially is affected by the TBI, by the lack of sleep, by the high operational tempo. So if I pause here, you can see how this might apply to firefighters, first responders, intelligence officials, soldiers. So the longer the career, the more time one is in a state of what we call high allostatic load, physiological load. The more time, the more damage occurs. And we can talk about these as injuries and impairments. As a framework, we can use the framework to understand injuries and impairments later in life. So a 45-year-old retired Navy SEAL is going to have certain constellation of problems. But we also can think of this as a performance framework. That same Navy SEAL, if we could have worked with him when he was 20 all the way through, we could have mitigated some of what we now know. We could have not prevented it, not eliminated it, but we could have mitigated it. There are things we could have done all the way along during the course of that career to improve performance, to improve health and quality of life, and maybe even extend the longevity of the career. So the framework, back to the framework, TBI, traumatic brain injury, sleep disturbance, hormonal disturbance, chronic pain, headaches, and then we get into all the ball of stuff we call psychological. So anger is up at the top of that list, depression, anxiety, just general anxiety, PTSD, addiction. Alcohol problems are very common in people, in men, protectors and warriors. And then the way in which all of this bleeds out into the rest of one's life. So it affects on family and marriage, the effects on intimacy, both sexual and emotional intimacy. We can talk about the switching from transition points. So for a soldier, that's going from military to civilian, major transitional change in life.
Yeah.
Or law enforcement, for firefighters, sometimes those transitions are like every day. Putting on the uniform in the morning, doing the job, coming home, taking the uniform off, transitioning from work to home. And then for all of us who are not warriors or protectors, we have other major transition points. So divorce, for example, loss of a job or changing of a job, even just moving to a job you want or getting married have been identified as significant points of stress in people's lives, even for things they're excited about.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then three more. In soldiers, in firefighters in particular, we see a lot of toxic exposures to things in the air, to things in the water. So respiratory illnesses and cancers are becoming more and more of a concern. And then what I call existential concerns, which is a great big bucket. And in soldiers and law enforcement and firefighters, this can take many different forms. Guilt over things one did, guilt over things one didn't do, surviving when others didn't survive, missing what you were doing, missing the tribe, missing that mission and purpose. So to go back to where we started a minute ago, that loss of purpose when a soldier leaves the military can be just a profoundly difficult point in life. But the rest of us experience this in ways too. I'm at that point where I'm old enough now to be contemplating retirement. Holy cow, what does that look like? What would my purpose be in retirement? Many people retire and they watch, TV reruns all day long and play a little golf, maybe see their grandchildren now and again. Is that enough? And maybe it is for some people. Maybe it isn't for everybody. Last thing, and this isn't part of the framework, but if we don't attend to these things, if we're not taking care of ourselves, we run the risk, high risk of suicide in our warrior and protector communities, soldiers and responders, and many other intense professions, ER nurses, ER doctors.
Yeah.
Today, just a few.
This is, you see me over here taking notes, but it's so incredible to hear about because I think there's such a big part on education, because also just knowing these things and being able to watch out for them, I'm sure if you're in these career fields, is just as important, because then it might help you know when to seek help or seek maybe specialists for certain areas. I have two questions. I'll just start with one. Out of the ones you've listed, is there one that is maybe one of the biggest concerns or the biggest negative factors when you think about operator syndrome? Is there one that sticks out to you as like, this is the one that I see the most that has the biggest negative impact?
Well, in operators and those kind of in the special operations community, it's traumatic brain injury. Because there are so many things that injure the brain of an operator. Yep. Impact forces that can cause concussions, blast exposures that cause a different type of injury from a concussion. We now know that blast exposure, like training with demolitions, breaching, shoulder-fired rockets, artillery, even firing rifles, often those micro blasts within the rifle, these cause an invisible wave that emanates out from the center that will go have a shearing effect. It will go through the soft tissue in your body. So it's literally going through the brain, and it damages the glial cells of the brain. And we can now see that on postmortem studies. And then you have all the other things. You have rucking with heavy weights on your back. You have jumping out of airplanes and landing hard, or whiplash effects when you pull the cord. You have guys that are diving and have history of oxygen depletion, rappelling out of helicopters and falls, tactical driving with its whiplash effects and crashing through things and slamming back and forth, and then even having, stuff in the vehicle that may be flying around when you stop or start or crash through something. How many times have you been choked out in combatives? That's a question I usually ask guys.
I think you should ask the other Chris that. Yeah.
How many times have you been choked out, Chris? How many times How many concussions have you had that have been diagnosed? How many concussions do you suspect you may have had? How many times did you get your bell rung, but didn't have time to stop or raise your hand? So
that's right. Yeah, you don't go to sick call. There's a mission to do. You don't go to sick call.
Guys don't.
I think second question with that, because I think you're getting there is writing these down and seeing a trend. It seems like, especially the operator syndrome, but these seem to compound on themselves because this is the lifestyle for law enforcement, for first responders, for a lot of different people in the military. Because you even mentioned artillery, infantry. There's so many jobs. It seems like they compound on each other, and that's also the overarching problem too. That makes it worse.
They compound, and these injuries are cumulative. So it's and that's the concept of a boxer being punch drunk. It's not 2 punches that cause that. It's 15 years of receiving punches. Each punch it adds up, and then with a TBI, that affects your hormones. The TBI affects your sleep, and so compounding is this vicious cycle, because when you stop sleeping, when your hormones are out of whack and you're drinking heavily, all of that comes back around and does more damage to your brain.
One of the things you mentioned, Chris, was around, I think it's an important one to call out here, the earlier intervention, like trying to spot these things earlier on. I'd be curious if you had to pick like 2 or 3, maybe the universal ones, right? For folks that because you talked about like some of these other major transitions points, like marriage or divorce or having a child, losing a job. There are people that experience these moments. Do you have like 2 or 3, I guess, like tactics or tips that you kind of default on? Like, are you doing this, right? Like almost like these very like baseline questions that you use to kind of help people to think through these things ahead of time.
Yeah. So, I mean, fully consistent with the pillars that you guys, that you're on the Path podcast is all about. Those pillars are, I put it in the framework of an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. So if you do everything to minimize your chronic inflammation in your body, which by the way, we can measure on a CT scan or in blood tests, there's ways we can measure various markers. If you do all the right things, right, as in effective things to manage inflammation, you're going to focus on better sleep, a whole foods diet, not junk food, fast food, sugar, sodas. Eliminate those.
There goes the pizza.
There goes my pizza. Damn. We didn't say how much we have to eat. So maybe I
need more of the steaks
and 5 steaks for dinner.
Sorry to derail it. Yeah.
Dang it. Hot sauna bathing is literally in randomized controlled trials, there's evidence that hot sauna bathing 3 times a week is good for your cardiac system. It reduces inflammation, which means it's good for your brain, and it reduces depression.
That's awesome.
We should all have a sauna in our house.
Yeah, I was literally just about to say that. I'm trying to
maybe a cold plunge. This cold plunge seems to do a similar thing.
Oh, Chris knows I'm very familiar. I love the cold plunge. I built my own. I can't go Gucci, as I would say on it, but yeah, I built my own, and I feel like it's 2 things. Like, one, you can't have a bad day if you start off by making your body think you might freeze to death. But at the same time, the other probably more clinical effects that I wouldn't be able to speak to accurately, but it definitely changed my mental health in so many ways too.
It's a profound physiological experience. It affects every system in the body. And all of our systems are connected, right? Our metabolic system, our central nervous system, endocrine system, musculoskeletal, et cetera. They're all interconnected. So things that hurt one hurt everything, and things that help one help everything. So we can have the vicious cycle, but the good news is we can create a virtuous cycle for ourselves.
Yeah, I like that. Vicious versus virtual cycles. That's good. That's really good.
Chris, can I ask one more question? Because it's your turn. But you've seen a lot for your 32 career. I can't believe you started when you're 5, because it looks like it's going well so far. But how much can you reverse things, especially maybe because we're not at that point maybe where people are having these proactive opportunities throughout their military career, or law enforcement or first responder. Let's say you're at the end of a 20-year career in special operations. What can you do to maybe even reverse things if it's possible.
Okay. Well, so we've talked about lifestyle. Let's talk about the professional kinds of treatments or interventions, which I think is really important. The two immediate low-hanging fruit: get your hormones checked. I mean, get a full, if you haven't done that, get your hormones checked. And probably get a sleep study. I mean, spending the night in a sleep lab while all of your physiological systems, many of them, are being evaluated during your sleep. So in a sleep study, they're usually looking at body temperature, cardiac functioning, breathing, eye movements, limb movements. They usually put a pulse oximeter on while you're sleeping. So there's a lot of brainwave activity. They put leads all over your head. So all of that is, I think, really important. In terms of treatments, if you're really hurting, if you're impaired, if you're injured, and most operators are by the time they're in their mid to late 30s, the treatments, I think there is a role for psychiatric medications. But what we've done with that in modern medicine is we've just blown it up horribly. Instead of 1 or 2 very targeted medications, a lot of guys end up with 5, 6, 10 medications. And I think for me, that's a no-go. Psychotherapy can be effective. The problem with psychotherapy is, how do you find somebody who can understand you as a warrior, as a protector, soldier, law enforcement? It's hard. It's harder to find competent therapists who are attuned to the culture and experiences that you've had. But the other problem is, I think too much of so-called psychotherapy is about talking about things and not enough about doing things. So I know people, and I see this in my college students, they've had the same therapist for 5 years, 10 years. They've been in therapy their whole life, many young people. When I hear that, what I want to say is fire your therapist, because that therapist isn't helping you. If you've been in therapy for more than 6 months or a year and you're not getting better, then you're not doing the right thing. Now, there are some really good treatments that most of mental health care industry doesn't even really use or maybe even know about. So I'll just riff on some of those. I'm a big fan of stellate ganglion block treatments, which is literally an outpatient procedure that involves an injection into the side of the neck, hitting the stellate ganglion. What that does is it dials down the activity, the arousal in your sympathetic nervous system. So it takes that fight or flight that's just chronically up at this level and it brings it down. So after that, and it works for men and women, people describe their anxiety goes down, they relax better, they sleep much better, and they're farther away from the anger tipping point. So literally within a few hours, there's immediate relief that can last for anywhere from 2 to 12 months. It's not a permanent cure. You can go and repeat it. You can have it done more than once. But what I always say to folks is this is the way to start your treatment, but it's just the beginning. Because once you've cleared all that out of your system and you're sleeping a little better, relaxing better, now you're able to get more out of your therapy. Now you're able to engage in your anti-inflammatory lifestyle even more so. Now you're able to start repairing relationships and changing some of your patterns of functioning. So stellate ganglion block therapy, very important treatment. Ketamine infusion, hyperbaric oxygen therapy. There's a treatment called transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is FDA approved for depression, but we've just figured out, or we're in the process of figuring out how to make it better. And some of the branches, and I don't know if this is sensitive, so I won't name a branch, but some of the branches of the U.S. military are now using the EEG guided version called MERT, is the acronym for it, magnetic electroresonance therapy, are using this with operators in between deployments or in between training evolutions as a way of resetting the brain a little bit. And we think that this helps with TBI, it helps with sleep, it certainly helps with mood and cognitive functioning. Psychedelic medications. A lot of guys are finding game changers with like ibogaine and 5-MeO, DMT retreats. Yeah. I'm going to just say it right now. We don't do this in America because it's not FDA approved. We don't have the science yet to make that happen. But in Mexico, it's been used for decades. And so a lot of guys go to clinics in Mexico to have this treatment, or Jamaica, or Peru, or Chile. there are places that are providing good medical care using psychedelics. And the medical care aspect of it is important. This is not some guy in the back in some dark alley handing you little things in a brown paper bag, selling you things in a brown paper bag. This is medically controlled, medical oversight. There's a screening, all the stuff that you would want in medical care, which is important.
Yeah. Now, the for everybody listening, the important piece here is there's options, one, but I also want to underline again and just reiterate, like, look at the self first. And if this is self that, you need to look at with someone else, then that's fine too. But take a look at that, put that at kind of the top of your mind first as an option. And one of the things I want to highlight, Chris, is also you did have a flair of accountability in there too. When you were talking about talk therapy, for example, that's good, but what are you doing? And so for everybody listening, think about that too. It fits really, Chris, you are like almost a poster child for the whole self philosophy that Colin and I harp on, the various aspects of strength, the importance of physiological understanding as well as psychological understanding. And then this idea of accountability. Don't just talk about it, be about it. If you're going through the effort of trying to unpack some of these things, then actually do something about it and just keep the right people in your corner to help you make the improvements that you need. So the way that you, no pun intended, the way that you operate in your day-to-day work it's really just lockstep with what we talk about. So I think this has been a phenomenal discussion. I know we're coming up on time, so I want to take a left-hand turn here because there's an important question I want to ask you about this other part of your life in historical crime novel writing. Because when I looked into your background, I was like, what? Like, first of all, like it's just a litany of like your experience on the clinical side is just so long, and the education side it's so long, and then I just saw that you've published historical crime novels as well, which just seemed like kind of out there. And then I got to thinking about it and I was like, well, I don't know, like there might be an interesting intersection between your psychology work and these crime novels. So I'd love to understand like what brought that about, this desire to do historical crime.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for asking. That's I always love talking about this. So I've written, I think I've published 9 historical crime novels. Actually, one of those 9 is a collection of shorter stories and novellas. And then I have another one that has not yet been published. 9 of the books total so far fall into essentially a series with the same protagonist. So the books are set in 1934 as America's coming out of the Great Depression. Yep. I would say the books are really a way of telling stories about America and the people in America at that time. The protagonist is written in the first person. So the protagonist is actually a criminal. He's a bank robber. He's an independent bank robber, but he's got a conscience. So he's also kind of a good guy, and he interacts with all levels of society. And so it's I love American history.
Yeah.
I think part of what I think is we've gotten away from understanding our past. My first book that I finished writing it in 2008. So it's about 15 years now. It was published in 2013. They're all online. They've been under a pen name, Christopher Bartley, which is an inversion of my first and middle name. They're being republished like this year under my actual name. So you could probably find them soon under my actual name.
Awesome. So the question is, if I'm gonna pick up, I am a big reader. You can't see it through this angle, but I've got all my fiction books I keep in this room because I'm a closet case nerd that likes to keep them on display. So I'm going to start with the first one. But the question is, should I pick up a copy that says Christopher Bartley, or should I pick up a copy that says Christopher Free?
They'll be the same. They'll be the same.
So that's fair. But
the name will be different. The name will be different.
Do you want the classic or the new and improved? I don't know.
Exactly.
I think you're more of a classic guy, Chris. I don't know, but
I think Coke Classic was much better than the new and improved.
That's right.
Just to connect it to my work, I would say I've spent my career talking with men and women about life and death issues, and with an emphasis on death often. And so understanding the way men with guns live and think and operate, and codes of honor, and times where there aren't codes of honor, and savagery and humanity often kind of are right next to each other, juxtaposition. So,
yeah.
I'd love to ask as we're wrapping it up, but our whole self philosophy is physical, mental, spiritual, personal accountability, and a strong community. And those are the things that Chris and I, through our own struggles, came to the realization were some of the key things that helped us get back on the path. When you think about that, and we're always open to feedback because we want to make sure we're continuing to grow in the right direction ourselves, but also make sure as we're having guests on, we're focusing in the right areas. When you think about those 5 aspects of the whole self philosophy, is there something missing, or is there something, that you would change?
I'd have to really give that a deep thought, but I don't think so. What I would say is I would elevate the point of purpose. And right now we have what many are calling a crisis of mental health in America, especially among younger people. About half of young adult females identify as being significantly depressed and or anxious.
Wow.
And as a college professor, I can see this in my students. The rates of depression and anxiety in my students are really high. People ask me, why is this? And yes, social media is a part of it, I think. But I would say the fundamental root cause is we are a society that is losing touch with purpose in our lives. We don't go to church at the same way we used to. We don't engage with benevolent foundations like we used to. People are much more isolated, even in their own homes and communities and neighborhoods. And when I talk with young people and I say, well, what is your mission and purpose in life? They can't answer that question. If you can't answer or even think about that question, not that you need to know and not that it won't change, but to not even be thinking about that, I think is part of why we have a problem of malaise and ennui in America now. And I don't know how we say to the young people of America, you got to get outside your comfort zone. You got to go take on some challenges. You got to get away from having adults protect you. The safetyism that we've layered on everything. We've also removed challenges, and we've removed from many people the mindset that they need to have a mission and purpose in life. Your purpose is not to be comfortable. Your purpose is to do something that contribute the lives of other people. And when you do that, you're going to feel better. Service to others will be service to yourself.
Yeah. I like that. Service, purpose isn't comfort. It's service to others, right? It's some sort of other purpose, or some sort of other commitment to others, right? So I think that's a good outlook. So for everybody listening, I think let that be kind of your call to action for, if you haven't yet, 1, you're not alone. So don't beat yourself up too bad about it. But 2, do something about it, right? Just like we talked about before. If you haven't stopped to think about like, what am I focused on? What's the North Star of my life right now? And do a little bit of reflection and some deep thought on what that might be in your own life. So with that, Chris, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I want to give, before we wrap up here, I want to give you an opportunity. Is there any sort of projects or research that you're working on right now that's got you excited that you're able to share? And then what's the best place if folks want to go and learn a little bit more about you? Where's the best place that we can send them to go learn about you and your work?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer the last question first. My website, chrisfree.com, is probably an easy place. There's a lot of podcasts. I've done a lot of podcasts out there. So those are out there on the interwebs. What am I doing now? That's a good question. I'm kind of at a little bit of a lull point. The book was published in March. I've been doing a lot of talks and presentations related to it. This fall, I have a lot more of that coming up. So I will just be continuing to give talks and consulting. I've got several international trips planned and scheduled to work with different groups around the world. And then if I fast forward 2 or 3 years, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that quite looks like.
It's going to be one of those pivot points, right? One of those transition points in your own life.
That's a little bit.
I absolutely think we're going to have you back on. There's so much more to dive into. Definitely a whole podcast on your novels, because I know Chris will have read them all by the end of next week. But I sincerely appreciate you coming on. I think your website's awesome too. There's so much there, and also ways that they can find your book, Operator Syndrome. But I sincerely appreciate it today. I've never taken so many notes on a podcast before, so I sincerely appreciate it and look forward to hopefully having you on again.
Thank you. This was great conversation. Love what you guys are doing.
Likewise. Thank you so much. And to everybody listening, be sure to go check out chrisfree.com. Check out Operator Syndrome, especially if it resonates with you. It's something you think would add value. And in the meantime, we'll see you on the path.
See you on the path.